Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm James with Organic Cultivators, and we're a Facebook group. We focus on organic cultivation and regenerative farming practices. And today we are going to have an interview with the wonderful Wendy Kornberg. And we've been trying to do this for about a month, and things keep happening. So hopefully today we can make this happen. For those of you who don't know, Wendy is a generational farmer. She farms cannabis at her farm Sunvis, and she's a really awesome lady. Definitely check out all her natural farming videos that are floating around out there on the internet. While we wait for her, for those of you who aren't familiar with the group, go check it out. There's some questions that you have to answer to get into the group, and they can be a little difficult, especially if you're newer to the discipline. You can back out. It's not going to count against you. You can send another request to join the group. So if you need to back out to do some research to answer the questions, we encourage you to do that, because if you don't answer the questions, you're not going to get in the group. And we want people to be doing their own due diligence when they have problems or when they're learning about new processes in cultivation. So we want you to be looking up your own stuff. So this is a good indicator of whether or not you're going to do that. So people who don't answer the questions don't get in. Don't worry, if you get declined the first time, you're not blocked from the group. You can always come back and reapply to join the group, and we'd be happy to have you. The moderator team in the group is really killer. So we try to keep all the information in the group away from the bro science arena. There's a lot of people in the group, so it can be a little bit of a daunting task for us. We can't see every comment. We do try to pop up on most every post, but there's only so many of us, and we all have lives and jobs and families and things that we're doing. So just remember that anytime a moderator and admin is hopping in the Facebook group and giving you advice, that's out of their own time. They're not getting paid to do that, and that's because they have a love for cannabis, they have a love for cultivation, and they are trying to spread this information and these ideals to as many people as they can. So if you are in the group, if you get a chance, thank those guys, because they really go above and beyond to make sure that the group quality is high, and we keep the people out of the group that don't need to be in the group. And so far, I think everything has been super cool. So again, if you haven't checked out the group, go check it out. And Wendy should be here with us in a minute. I just got a message from her, so you guys just hang out with me here, and we'll get to chatting to Wendy in a couple minutes. Oh, and for those of you who don't know, we're doing a GoFundMe for someone in the community, and you can find that it's in a bunch of the groups on Facebook, a bunch of the cannabis groups. So if you're in any of the cannabis groups, keep an eye out for the GoFundMe post. We'd really appreciate any help that you can give, and to show our appreciation, at the end of the GoFundMe, we're doing a giveaway. And I know between Wendy and I, we've amassed a decent list of prizes from different breeders and different growers. So there's going to be a decent variety of genetics. We're going to have a light. I think there's some consulting services. So there's going to be some cool prizes in there. I think Wendy even said she was going to throw in some of her OHN. So, for maybe someone of you who haven't journeyed into the arena of natural farming, you may find that input isn't going to work for you on your plants if you don't have other things to go with it. But OHN is great for your health too. So, and I believe that's primarily what Wendy is using the OHN for. I have to ask her about that, but I'm pretty sure it's primarily for health, and she doesn't really use it too much in the grow. There we go. You're fucking sideways.
I was like, wait, is it? I can never remember which way you're supposed to do it on the phone. If it's supposed to be like, I don't know, right side up, upside down.
Oh man, it's happening.
What's in the background?
Oh yeah, you got to make sure.
Just trying to not look like a total fucking slob. All right, cool.
Holy shit, it only took a month.
That's my life. And it's sunny out, so now I'm like inside all, oh fuck, of course it's like the first sunny day we've had in forever, but it's fine.
Yeah, it's sunny here too, but it's like 15 degrees, so
yeah, no, fuck that. Oh,
so
oh my god, what did I just do? Okay, wait,
there you go.
There we go.
I ashed in my water. Look at that. Oh well.
Nice, Bob. Ooh, that's a good idea. Hang on, I'm gonna go get water before we get started. Okay.
I wish there was a way to blow ashes out of water, but I don't think it works like that. Oh, I got it.
There is not. What? Did you really?
Yeah, I just dipped my finger into it. Connected to my finger.
Oh, hang on. So, Dujon? You guys out there in. Come on, dogs. Hi, honey. How are you? Okay. Okay, go get chiropracted. Oh, will you shut my car door? My back? Fuck. Thank you. Oh, dog party. Yay. No, you guys stay over here. Not. There you go. Okay, I'm super ready. I'm ready. I'm ready.
All right. The fabulous Wendy Kornberg.
Sure.
So how was your day today?
You're going to ask me all the hard questions, huh?
I doubt we'll even get to any super hard questions. So why don't you explain what a generational farmer is? Because you're a generational farmer, and I think probably some people don't really understand what that means.
Yeah, basically, generational farmer is just somebody whose parents were farmers also. Not that mine were necessarily farmers. I'm a second generation cannabis cultivator, so my parents did grow weed back in the day. And we had what I considered to be a garden, a small garden, which was about an acre though. So it was actually a fairly large garden, or what some people consider to be a small farm. But my parents didn't really sell produce or anything. It was just, that was what our subsistence was. Ooh, hey, be nice, you guys. Sorry, I've got dog chaos going on in the background. Yeah, but basically, being born into gardening and farming and just having that be a part of my life growing up, that was always there and always part of, what we did every year.
So that was like guerrilla growing. You were doing guerrilla growing up. How young were you getting into that?
Um, so guerrilla growing was basically growing cannabis out in the woods. Like, we generally didn't do it on our own properties or anything. The first time I actually grew cannabis at all, I think I was about 13 years old, and planted it at totally the wrong time of year. Had these little 4-inch pots that, had little tiny plants that got to about 2 inches tall. Didn't know males and females. I had no idea what I was doing. I had, handfuls of little tiny rocky seeded nugs, and was just like, this is really cool. I actually totally love doing this. And then my first real grow that, actually produced something, when I knew a little bit more about what I was doing, my first real grow on my own, I think I was 15 or 16 at the time. And that was basically, I think I had maybe 24 plants or so hidden off in the woods, like, dug little holes by the creek and had a 5-gallon bucket that I watered them with.
So were you helping your parents when you were a teenager in their operations, or were you just kind of doing your own
No,
thing? Okay.
I was just doing my own thing. No, my parents didn't, it wasn't really like out of the closet at that point in time. It's like everybody grew weed in Humboldt County back in the day. People just didn't talk about it. So, as you kind of got older and became of age, teenage years, and you figured out that everybody was growing, I distinctly remember this huge thing that happened. And we had, it was yellow ribbons and green ribbons, and it was logging versus environmentalism. And it caused this really bizarre chaos as a teenager. And then at some point, and a lot of it was like, oh, the hippies and the dirty dope growers with the green ribbons, and the environmentalists and blah, blah, blah. And at one point, because I was friends with a lot of people, so I was friends with some of the logger kids also. And, going over to somebody's house and realizing that their parents all grew weed too. And it just kind of like, it put the kibosh on this whole weird dissension thing where everybody's like, wait a minute, everybody grows weed? Oh, okay. So, yeah, it's just, but again, it wasn't like out in the open. So Humboldt County, we had the Campaign Against Marijuana Planters, which was acronym was CAMP, and it was funded by the DEA and the Humboldt County Sheriff's Department, and they hit Humboldt County really, really hard. So when we talk about the Emerald Triangle, which is Mendocino, Humboldt, and Trinity counties, Mendocino was very different. Like, they did grow generally in their yards. It was very much more generational in the form of like the kids actually helped with the cannabis farm as well. And I think a lot of that was because they had met, which was the marijuana eradication team, I think. And they just weren't quite as well funded as Humboldt County was. So for us, it was definitely more of a situation where, it was out in the woods, it was hidden away, it was tucked off somewhere. And so, as a kid, you weren't going to be hiking 5 miles up the hill with your parents. That was when you got older and did it on your own, basically.
So from the time you started doing like your own substantial grows at like 15, 16, whatever, have you been growing pretty much nonstop since then?
More or less. When I was going to college in Santa Barbara, I had a tiny apartment, so I wasn't growing then. And I didn't really grow when I was in Hawaii, just because same reason, like I didn't have a place to do it at. But other than that, yeah, pretty much.
So when did you actually start farming with like a commercial license to sell to dispensaries in California?
So we didn't actually have any ordinance or permits until 2016. Humboldt County was one of the first counties to have a medical marijuana ordinance, a land use act, basically. And so that was really the first permits that we had. Previous to that, we were farming with Proposition 215. So in California, 215 happened, I think it passed in 1995. And that allowed people to become caretakers, which meant
Okay.
that you could cultivate cannabis for patients. So we were definitely cultivating in that point. We were caregiving for AIDS patients in the Bay Area, cancer patients, and then just as things got looser and easier to kind of move forward with the medical marijuana ordinance, and everybody ended up having these medical cards. So at that point, then we had the dispensaries come on board, and you would go in and basically they would give you these stacks of patient files so that you could become a caregiver for all the patients who got their cannabis from the dispensary. So it's this really interesting, weird way of doing things that we weren't allowed to sell it, but we were allowed to take donations, and the dispensaries were allowed to take donations.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting flow through, and I still was doing other jobs as well. I wasn't just exclusively cultivating, and I didn't really have these like large, like the scale that we're at now is much bigger than when I started. I think back in the day had like, I don't know, 30 plants or something. So, but you didn't need a lot either. It was, the donation rate was much better then than it is now.
Okay. And what was your, like when you were farming under 215, what was your plant count per patient? What were you allowed to have?
Technically, most of them had 99 plants. So but I mean, we didn't grow that much, but most of the patient documentation from the doctor, 99 was the legal limit at the time for the
Per
state.
patient?
So almost every single, yeah, per patient.
Wow,
So
that's
almost every
insane.
single patient had that on their medical card, was you can cultivate 99 plants. And I think carrying was like up to a pound or something that you could carry with. Might have been more. I don't really remember anymore what that was, but yeah. So I mean, technically, I could have grown, thousands and
Did
thousands of
that ever
plants, but at the
change? Did they
time,
ever drop that?
I don't think so. I think that it's technically still like 99 maximum for medical, but the thing with California is that once recreational passed, so Proposition 64, that was 2016, 17? No, must have been 2018 when it got enacted. I don't know. I'm sorry, their cannabis years are
At
like
some
dog
point.
years. It's like every cannabis year with recreational cannabis in California feels like it's like 20 years long. So at some point, 64 passed, and that was a real shift because it no longer mattered what your doctor said. Technically, the state said anybody can now grow 6 plants recreationally. We don't care if you have a medical card or not. It doesn't matter. Some counties still have medical cards still exist. Proposition 215 is still a legal proposition. It's not off the books by any way, shape, or form. But Prop 64 combined both the Medical Use and the Adult Use Act into one thing, MAURCSA, the MAURCSA, Medical Adult Use Recreational Cannabis. I don't know what it stands for anymore. Everybody just says Prop 64. But it basically combined medical and recreational and created a series of regulatory policy. Basically, it created a regulatory policy for any cultivation, and that really shifted things because what they said is, we don't care if it's medical or recreational, we're going to consider it commercial. And if it's commercial, you're going to be held to these standards. And one of those standards is your local agency, be it your county, your city, or your state, whatever governing body you happen to be in. So in Humboldt County, we're unincorporated where I live. So it's literally Humboldt County. They got to create the ordinance that says whether or not you get to cultivate, what that looks like, and everything about it. So our county said, we don't care if you have medical or not. if you have more than 6 plants, we're going to consider it commercial and you have to get a permit. So, you know, it really did make things much more difficult and much more expensive, because with a permit comes all of these land use regulations. So it came attached with things like if you have legacy roads that go through your property that are old logging roads that were created before you even got there, you have to fix them. You have to get the upkeep. You have to, like, you know, change whatever it is. All the culverts in Humboldt County, almost every single culvert is undersized, and culverts are really expensive to replace. So some of these farms have like a dozen culverts under their road, and to rip out every single one of those to get it up to the standard of this 100-year flood thing, which is about 36 inches. Most of the culverts are 18 inches. So, you know, when you're looking at $10,000 to $25,000 per culvert, if you have 100 of them, that's, you know, you're looking at $100,000 plus. So it really became very, very expensive. And then taxes, and then all these large scale grows got involved. So you have places like Santa Barbara and some really big scale grows in Santa Cruz and Lake County as well, which flooded the market, tanked the prices. So we now have this wonderful set of policy and regulation that is really hard to come into compliance with. We're not even going to talk about CEQA, which is the what does it stand for? CEQA is it's the Environmental Quality Act, California Environmental Quality Act, something like that. And that's also really, really expensive. Most counties aren't prepared for that. California's a mess. It's just absolutely a mess.
So why don't you tell everybody about your farm? How big's your farm? How many plants do you farm on it? You know, what, I guess start there, and then I have a million more questions about all that shit.
So our farm is it's 160 acres, but of that, our county also created in their medical ordinance, or their marijuana ordinance, that if you have, for every 100 acres that you own, you can farm up to 1 acre. So because there were 160, our maximum will be 1 acre. We won't be able to farm more than that unless the county changes the ordinance, which I doubt that they will.
You can't do 1.6?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. It's a ceiling of 1 acre per 100. So if you had 190 acres, you're still at 1 acre.
That's pretty fucked. Okay.
It's interesting. We'll just leave it at that. So yeah, so basically the ranch is 160 acres. Of that, we have been cultivating 18,000 square feet. So we have 10,000 square feet of light deprivation and 8,000 square feet of full-term outdoor. And then hopefully this year, we will be bringing on board our dry farm, which is an additional 20,000 square feet down below. So all told, we'll be at 38,000 square feet. So about 3/4 of an acre, a little under 1 acre, give or take.
Okay. When you started your
and that's just cannabis. Like that's just the cannabis. We also do vegetables. This year I'm going to be bringing on board a bunch of trees. So we're going to do cherries and apricots to start this year. And then I believe hopefully this year we're also going to get a piggery going and a bunch of meat birds. So we'll have animal husbandry happening also.
Okay, maybe so the chickens you have now, right now, you just have for eggs then?
Yeah, no, my feathered dinosaurs are just kind of I have them for manure mostly. I don't think they're laying anymore. They're old chickens.
Okay.
So we'll get new layers this year for the homestead, and then out at the farm I'm going to be building a chicken tractor and getting some bear fencing, because that's our main large apex predator. Is we've got bobcats, we've got mountain lions, and we have bears, but the bear I think is going to be the biggest, and coyotes. But I think the bear is going to be the biggest issue with the chickens and hogs. So we'll have to build some good chicken tractors and get some good fencing out there so that the bears don't eat all of my chickens.
So obviously bringing animals onto the farm, the whole idea behind that is closing the loop. Can you explain what closing the loop is on your farm?
Yeah, so basically what we try to do is have as many closed loops as possible. And what that means is that a loop is a circle, right? So whatever is happening just feeds back into itself. So ideally getting as self-sufficient as we possibly can, which means we don't bring anything onto the farm other than, a few things that we can't grow ourselves. So with Korean natural farming specifically, the biggest inputs that we have to purchase are some herbs. I am growing angelica, so in about 3 years, I don't have to purchase that anymore. But currently, we do have to purchase angelica. Cinnamon, I can't grow. I don't think we can get cinnamon trees here, so I'll always have to purchase that for Oriental Herbal Nutrient. Eventually, I'm going to get a still so I can brew my own alcohol to make OHN. I'm going to be doing beer hopefully this year, so that's also another input for OHN. And so those are all closed loops. What that means is that if I'm growing the hops, brewing the beer, making the input, it's all staying on my farm. And that does play into animal husbandry, like you mentioned, because we need the manure. And I mean, you don't need the manure necessarily. Like there are people that grow like vegan weed. No offense to the vegan weed people. It's awesome. I'm just not a fan.
Plants aren't
I
vegan.
like to eat meat. Plants aren't vegan. It's an important part of farming, in my opinion, having the animal husbandry going on. It just adds a different layer to things. There's I don't know, there's just something symbiotic that works for me with animals. And again, probably a big part of that is that I eat meat. So, for me, I want to be able to grow the meat that I'm eating. I don't want to support, these large scale industrial meat companies, which are absolutely terrifying. My dad actually raises cattle. He has like 4 head of cattle up in Oregon. So a lot of times I'll just go up and like get meat from him and put it in the freezer. But eventually we'll be working towards closing that loop, and we'll have our own manure to source to put on our gardens. We'll have our own animals that we can put in our freezer, and not to be super draconian, but the reality is that we don't live in a sustainable world anymore. When I look at, the consumerism that's happening, the capitalism, and just all of the craziness and chaos that our society is in, I just don't see this as being something that when my kids become my age, that our world is going to be continuing in this way. So, should the shit hit the fan in the most spectacular way possible, I want to be able to say, like, I have my farm, I have my food, I have my subsistence. I can actually survive, not just survive, but I can actually thrive on my own without, society, should that, zombie apocalypse or something happen.
Yeah. Alien invasion.
I went from closed loops to like zombie apocalypse. Yeah.
Hey, compost the zombies, you're good to go.
Exactly. ZAA, zombie amino acids.
Right. Some big old barrels. Yeah, can you explain your light depth and how you guys do that and how that works?
Yeah, we're old school. We still are hand pullers. So basically what we have is a raised bed that has a PVC hoop over it. So rows of PVC. And you have what we call panda plastic, or other people call it black and white plastic. It's black on one side and white on the other. And it basically deprives your plants of light. So we pull it. Our schedule is like the crazy schedule that, anybody who works with me is like, oh, we hate you, but we get it. We love it. It works. It's horrible. But basically you're up at 4 a.m. pulling the plastic so that your plants are breathing all night long. You have, your rhizosphere of your plants is able to off gas and do all the wonderful things it does in nature. But in order to get a faster harvest, you have to close that light cycle down to a 12-12. So we pull the tarps early in the morning before the sun is up, and then we open them back up again at the appropriate time. So for example, if sunset is 8 p.m., we'll reopen them at 8 a.m. so that we have just a solid 12 hours of light. And it works really well. It's the best for the plants. You don't have mold, you don't have powdery mildew. A lot of people like closing at like 7 p.m. and opening at 7 a.m., which is easier as a human being because it's just a more normal schedule. But unfortunately, for us at least, what we've found is that the condensation that happens and the temperature variations and all of that, it becomes really problematic really fast. So we want our plants to be open to the air and the wind as much as possible and not to have any temperature variables happening where it's like, okay, it's 90 degrees under the tarp with, 100% humidity, but outside it's, 70 or 80 degrees with, 30% humidity. So we're trying to keep it as close to nature as we can.
Okay. Why don't you walk everybody through what you did to prep your soil when you first got on the farm before you grow?
So we didn't actually, I stopped to have babies, so I wasn't on the farm for a little while. And the people that were out there, my partner at the time and our workers decided to, oh my gosh, my TV just randomly turned on. That was super weird. Sorry. Random. Okay. So they decided in their wisdom and I don't know, cannabis culture, I guess, to put smart pots out there. So we had like 200 100-gallon smart pots in rows with potting soil and spaghetti line drippers and all that good stuff. And I hate them. Sorry, smart pots. I'm sorry, everybody, but I freaking hate those things. I got the idea of it's supposed to air prune your roots and things. It really doesn't. Like, they just coil up on the bottom of those, and the amount of water that gets wasted with those smart pots is astronomical. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. And I'm not a big fan of potting soil. So it was a lot of things happened that I was just like, when I get back out there, this is all changing. So over the last, 3 to 5, 6, 7, oh gosh, I don't even know. Over the last however many years it's been, again, cannabis years, I don't know, 25 years. Over the last years that I've been able to get back out on the farm, I've slowly been transitioning everything. So we ripped out the center of the beds last year in one of the gardens so that we could have a wider growing space. And a lot of that has to do with the taxation in California. We get taxed per square foot for the walkways. So when I added it up, I was like, wow, we're paying an extra like $5,000 a year to not cultivate this area when we could be cultivating it and making, 20,000 extra. So I got in there last year and ripped out the center of those beds so that they're just like one wide bed now. And those did have originally potting soil in them. And they also originally they were smart pots. They transitioned to beds that had plastic underneath because I guess the idea was weed suppression.
Okay.
And I mean, it's great. It worked. It definitely, we didn't have any weeds, but also like your plants didn't have any access to the native soil, which was just totally counterintuitive to how I've always learned how to farm. So we ripped the plastic out, we ripped the middle of the beds out, we did an initial tilling just to get the potting soil amalgamated with our native soil. And then from then on, we have been no-till. And so in the fall, after our last harvest, we spread cover crop. I prefer a mix of legumes. So basically we use bell beans, which are also called fava beans, a winter fava. We use winter peas, and we use vetch. And those are all nitrogen fixing, which is really, really great. And it means that, again, I can buy less manure because I have a plant that when you cut it down, you leave the roots intact. And if you pull them up, it's actually really neat to see. They are these little tiny fuzzy balls that are nitrogen nodules. And that's basically a slow release nitrogen fertilizer. So because of that, we don't have to spend as much money on manures and other nitrogens. So the bell bean, the cover crop gets mowed down in the springtime. The nodules get left behind. We're still playing with how we want to actually process that biomass from the cover crop. So we've done a few different techniques. We've run it through a chipper to make it more kind of compostable. We've composted it. We've done some chop and drop, which works really well if your plants are small enough, but there have been many years where we didn't get to it in time. So we have like 6 foot tall fava beans, and they're really woody at that point. They're difficult to deal with, and you drop them and they just don't really decompose very quickly. So, the SOP that we're trying to get on schedule with is chopping them when they're about 2 to 3 feet tall so that they'll actually fall to the ground and they'll just decompose quickly there. And I think that this year we might be covering with plastic. The idea would be that that would be a light occlusion and solarization, where your soil would heat up faster, your biomass is going to decompose quicker, and you can plant earlier. But you have to have sun for that to work. And I don't know that this season is going to really be conducive to that. We have a really late winter this year. So we're finally getting water, which is awesome. But I don't know that we'll be able to actually get that covering happening the way that I'd like to. So that's one of the gardens that we do. The other garden is actually very similar. It's also in the ground. It started with smart pots. We implemented those, amalgamated our soils, and it's pretty much the same, other than the fact that it doesn't have raised beds. So there's no boards on the side. It's just straight on the ground. And then the full-term garden is also straight in the ground. And last year was the first year that we were able to cultivate that, because we finally got a pond. We waited 3 years for a pond permit. So that finally came into play. We were able to cultivate it, and that is straight native soil. So there's no potting soil in that. That is literally it was a fallow field. And we did an initial tilling. We added on that one a ton of compost. I think we had 60 yards of compost added to that that's about 10,000 square feet, because we've got a couple thousand square feet of vegetables. And we did 4 yards of organic chicken manure, 2 yards of organic goat manure, and 2 yards of organic steer manure. And then a bunch of other micronutrient and micro and macronutrient supplements. So we did some oyster shell. We did a ton of earthworm castings. We had some shrimp meal and some crab meal. And I'd have to look at the list. It's a huge list, but that was just in that first initial year to really get things activated quickly. And then we did IMO4 as well. So indigenous microorganisms, which is a Korean natural farming methodology. And that input is taken through 4 different steps. I'd like to eventually get it to step number 5, which is using a manure source. But sometimes the timing on that can be a little bit rough when it's like time to plant. And
that's
you need
basically IMO
you need your manure in there already. It is, yes. Yeah, so it's you're taking your IMO 3. So IMO 1 is a rice collection that you put out, and you're inoculating it with fungal mycelium. And then IMO 2, you add that brown sugar, and what that does is it puts it into a dormant phase, basically. So your IMO 2 is generally full of all types of fungal propagules and spores and things. You add that to a carbon and carbohydrate source. So generally we're using wood chips and some type of grain, and that becomes IMO 3. IMO 4 is when you take your IMO 3, you add that to your soil. So what you're doing now is you're inoculating all of your beneficial bacteria and microbes and fungi into the soil it's going to be in. And then IMO 5 is when you would take that IMO 4 and add that to a nitrogen source. And you're basically just kickstarting everything, and you can use much smaller amounts of all of your inoculants, or all of your amendments can be a smaller amount, because there's enough biology to really be able to get in there and make that plant available quickly.
So once you're cutting down your cover crop, do you guys like go back and plant any companions, or are you just dropping that? And what are you guys doing after that?
Yeah, I do companion plants. So with light deprivation, it's a lot harder, because light deprivation is a much more population intensive type of farming. So it's, we're planting every 1.5 feet on the center, where it's a turn and burn type of situation, where you're getting them in, you're getting them turned, you're getting them out, you're getting your harvest, and you're getting your paycheck, and then you're replanting. So I've played with companion plants with that, and I do it every year because I enjoy it, and I really like planting things. I don't like just growing cannabis. I like growing everything. Literally, I have like boxes of seeds from forever. So last year we did a little bit of companions with walking time is one of my favorite ones to do, actually, because it stays really short and it actually becomes a living mulch, which is great. But then when you're doing your cover crop, it's like I have to dig them. I end up digging them up and putting them on the side of the garden, where they usually end up rooting. And so then I'm like, it's again, one of those one of those kind of sort of tedious processes that I still actually love doing. But then in the full term garden, that's where I get to have a lot of fun with companions. So I do things that I don't recommend to people, and I'll still do them anyway. So like planting cucumbers and watermelons, I'm like, don't do this, you guys. These are vining crops, and vining as a companion to your cannabis is usually not the best choice because it will actually vine up your weed, and it can strangle it, and it can become problematic. But I'll start seeds and then be like, what am I doing with, a dozen watermelon plants? I don't know. I'll just put them over here. So last year we had watermelon, we had cucumber, I have rudbeckia. All of our gardens are named after flowers, and those flowers are supposed to be planted in the garden. So one of our light deprivations is called daffodil, and there's a huge row of daffodils outside of the garden on the edge. The other one is lavender, which I bought lavender plants and they didn't get planted, so they died last year. So we'll try that again this year. And then we have sunflower. So sunflower is our full-term garden and has sunflowers generally growing along one side, and then rudbeckia at the beginning and end of each row as well. And what else is in there? That's what there was for the most part last year. And then I have a couple rows of vegetables, which also are companion planted with pollinators. So I like flowering plants, anything that's going to be blooming. Oh, we did milkweed last year too, which was really fun one to grow. And I'll be implementing a lot more of that as well.
It's pretty too.
It is. It's a really pretty plant. And what we know, what we're seeing right now is, so my ex-partner actually is from San Luis Obispo, and every year down there at Avila Beach, all the monarch butterflies come, and they literally are dripping off of the eucalyptus trees down there usually. And this year it didn't happen, and it's a really big deal. Like everybody is kind of freaking out about this, and there's a lot of there was a great article that I read. It was actually on Weather Channel, I think, or something. It was a weather app, and I'm like, oh, the monarch butterflies. This is interesting. I wonder what they're saying about it. And it was a lot of, scientists are trying to figure out what happened this year, why the population was incredibly decimated. And a lot of that, they think they're kind of tracing it back to industrial agriculture and all of the pesticides and herbicides that are being used, as well as the fact that the monarchs are losing their native habitat, that all these fields that used to have milkweed in them are being transitioned over to cattle farming and industrial farming, and that food source is no longer there. So, we just happened to grow milkweed last year for fun. So this year I'm definitely ramping that up. We'll be doing a lot more of that. Especially I want to put it through the orchard and things like that. So, for me, people are always like, well, what do you choose as a companion plant? And I'm like, I literally will just go through my seed box and be like, what do I want to plant this year? There's nothing you can't plant with cannabis. That's not true. There are things you probably should not plant as a companion plant with cannabis. The one main thing being Brassica family. So that would be like your mustards, your broccoli, your kale, your arugula is another one. And the only reason why those aren't good is because that's the one species or family, I should say, of plants that actually does not create it doesn't have endomycorrhizal communication. It doesn't work with fungal.
It likes bacterial
colonies.
dominant soil.
Likes bacterially dominant soil, and cannabis likes fungally dominant soil. And so what we found anecdotally through my farm and a few others is that when you're planting cannabis next to some of these brassicas, those cannabis plants tend to be stunted. They're smaller, they don't get as big, they're just, and it was something that was brought to my attention by my friend Season from Five Sisters Farms. And she was like, look at this is a trip. I think it's the arugula. And I started thinking about it. I'm like, well, that makes perfect sense, because if you have a plant that's literally putting out exudates that are antifungal, and you have the cannabis that needs that fungal relationship to really thrive, you end up with an area that doesn't have fungi, and so your cannabis doesn't have what it needs, and it just becomes a problematic cycle throughout it. So that's the only thing that I say that you probably should not use as a companion plant. But otherwise, I mean, sky's the limit. Go for it. Be aware that again, if you do plant vines, there is a chance that you'll have a freaking watermelon hanging.
Better be out
6 feet
there
off
in your
plant.
garden watching your shit.
Yeah.
On
And that's
peeling
true
the
always.
vines.
So
Yeah, definitely. And so you brought up milkweed, and it kind of ties into my next question, which was going to be, you obviously grow a lot of stuff. You have a wide variety of plants, and since you're not farming all of the acreage, a good portion of your land is fallow, which means it's really healthy. It should be. Um, I have milkweed here, and I collect seeds every year. So we're going to plant some more milkweed. But the one thing I notice every year with the milkweed is that I get aphids about 2 times, but they're only ever there about a week because whatever else is around here, it's fucking getting them. So how often have you guys had any bug problems on your cannabis crop with the extensive companion planting and all the pollinating plants that you have around to attract all those predators?
I love this question because this is a really fun question for me to answer because I've been doing this for so long that it's like, I've seen it all. We've experienced all of it so far, except for root knot nematode. I'm expecting that'll be some year I'm gonna have to deal with that. I know. Hopefully not. Maybe not actually. Which we'll have to talk about the
Your fungus?
the nematophagous fungi, which is really cool.
Yeah.
But at any rate, so back in the day when it was just like seriously monocropping, spider mites were a big problem. Thrips became a big problem. By the way, white Dutch clover is an awesome banker for thrips, which you don't really want.
Yeah, I've noticed
So
clover
I
too.
don't do that anymore. But we used to, kind of have issues with bugs almost every year. There would be something that would pop up and you'd have to spray something and figure it out, and, whatever. And what I found fascinating is that the more I do Korean natural farming, so this will be our 4th season of doing KNF at the farm. And last year was the first season that we had 0 bugs, no problems, absolutely none. The year before that, so the 2019 season, our full term garden, which we tried to plant in like the beginning of August with plants that had been in 1-gallon pots and they were totally stunted. We were waiting for our state license to plant it, which is why we were so delayed. It took them about 6 months to get us a license for that particular garden. The other ones were earlier. I don't really know, state, whatever. Government agencies work in really weird ways, in my opinion. So
bureaucracy is wonderful.
Yeah. So the full term garden got in really, really late. The plants were not healthy. They were totally sick. I didn't get IMO onto it because I was so busy doing paperwork. It was just like, shove them in the ground, hand water, we'll figure it out. I don't know. And we had hemp aphids like there was no tomorrow. It hit specific cultivars much worse than other ones. But right across from the full term garden is our other light deprivation garden. And that has had amazing soil. The plants got in on time. Nothing was, everything was really healthy. So we're talking about a separation of like maybe 10 feet between the 2 gardens. 0 aphids over there. None. They did not go to that side. They only went to the full term garden that was full of sick plants, basically. And so that to me was just like, I know that, like, rationally, I understand that healthy soil makes a healthy plant and a healthy plant doesn't get diseases and pests. But to actually see that in action is a whole different thing. Like, it's crazy to be like, wow, those plants over there have 0 issues. And these plants over here have just about every aphid in the freaking county flocking to it. So, so that was 2019. And then in 2020, like I said, like our soil just bumped up health-wise really, really quickly because of the way that we treated it and all the IMO that I put on and all of that. Oh, wow, there's a huge hawk flying outside. And yeah, we didn't have bugs. There was like an aphid here or there basically, but for the most part, when it's open and you have pollinators and you have, you have all the natural sources working for you. You've got wind, you've got birds, you've got, whatever the case may be. And so it was really, really cool to see that. I'm like, I don't really, I mean, I have some Jadam pesticide solutions just in case, but the reality is, you know, we hope to never have to use those anymore.
So you mentioned the Jadam pesticides. Have you had russets in the past, and what did you do to deal with the russets?
I have had russets, and I have run some trials. I'm reluctant to say anything for sure because russets. So let me just caveat this with, this is the book y'all should get if you don't have it yet. Okay, it's the orange book, it's the orange Jadam book, and it goes through all the pesticides in it, as well as fertilizers and Jadam method, which I don't really use, but I do have the pesticide solutions. Is the My kid drew all over the front of it. Oh man. um, so JWA Jadam wetting agent is amazing. It's basically just a castile soap, so you can use it as a surfactant for other you know, fertilizers and things if you want. You can use it as a standalone. If you're in an indoor or a greenhouse, I highly recommend utilizing it as part of your IPM. You should have an integrated pest management plan that includes whatever it is that you want to use, but it's a preventative. These are integrated pest management plans. This is not pest eradication. Oh crap, what do I do now? It's not, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to catch them before they become an infestation. And that means proper scouting, which is also really important that I see most people don't do. It's like, oh dear, I think I have russets. I'm like, yeah, you got russets. You should have been scoping that ahead of time with your dino light or some type of loop so that you can catch it before it gets to this really bad point. But Jadam wetting agent, once a month to once a week, depending on where you're at and who's next to you. So, for example, the grow that I advise for in Colorado is shares a building with another grow that has it was fun to walk through there. And so for my grow that I advise on, we're like, yeah, you need to be spraying twice a week because all the bugs from that grow are just flowing right through your wet walls and right through your hallways and into your grow. And that's always going to be problematic because they're not eradicating next door. They're not doing a good job. So, Jadam wetting agent just as a standalone works really well. Jadam natural or Jadam herbal solution, JHS, is the additional kind of, you know, stepping up the game. So if your JWA alone isn't really working very well, if you have an infestation, then you want to add your JHS, which we prefer the Jerusalem artichoke. Again, in this Jadam book, there is, he mentions basically some of the major pesticide solutions that he prefers. Jerusalem artichoke is one of them. Easy to grow everywhere, so it's a great one for everybody to be using. Ginkgo is another one that seems to be very effective. There are some teachers that are teaching natural farming that are recommending California Bay laurel, making a JHS out of that. I and a few of my other farms have collaborated on that, and all of us are now at the point that we agree that it is not very effective. It does kill. There is a mortality rate that seems to be better than nothing, but the reality is it's a really noxious one to make. The smell of laurel is so it's a bay leaf. It's amazing for cooking. It's incredibly strong. I mean, you can't do it inside. It has to be done outside because the smell is so noxious.
Is that the one you did in your house?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I moved it outside, and when I set my Instant Pot down, the steamer blipped and a little teeny drop shot up and like hit me in the face. And I was like, oh, okay, you know, I'm just gonna finish plugging this back in and I'll finish the, you know, the brewing of it outside. And as I was plugging it in, I was like, ooh, it's kind of burning a little bit. And then I was like, oh my gosh, it's really burning. And I mean, I had to go and wash with soap and water a few times. And so that to me also, I'm like, you know, it's probably not a great one to start with. Efficacy wise, I'm on the fence with it. The other few farmers I've tapped in with are also on the fence with it. There are some teachers, like I said, that are teaching that it works really well. So I don't know exactly what they're doing differently to have those results. For me, I specifically tested it on the hemp aphid. So I also have what I call my dirty room, and I purposely will infest plants in that room with different bugs so that I can check it out and do side by sides and find out what works and what doesn't, which is why I know that the bay laurel was not. I mean, I had like a 60% mortality rate the first time I sprayed, and I was really excited. I was like, this is amazing. And then subsequently it was like I didn't have any new dead aphids at all. And I'm like, okay, so that's really weird. And then they were just gone. And they didn't die, they left, which, can be okay, I guess, except for where did they go? Well, they went to the other plants pad. So, for me, if I've got a bug that I need to kill, I want something that's actually going to kill it. I want something that is comfortable for me to make and use. I want to be able to get it on my skin and not have to worry about it. So again, the JHS with the ginkgo and or the Jerusalem artichokes, those seem to be the preferred ones that we're having good efficacy with. That does take us to the russet mites, which it seems to be falling true that you have to use a sulfur solution. Not really. The easiest thing to get rid of them effectively is a sulfur solution. So Jadam also has that, Jadam sulfur, JS. And it's a nice product to make because it's cheap, it's easy, you don't really use a lot of it. I have not yet, I did one small test on the russets and it seemed to work pretty well, but that hasn't been confirmed yet. So I don't know that I can say that for sure this is your go-to. But especially for commercial cultivation, it probably is going to be the best solution we have that is natural. And because it's a different process, like the way that it's created is not the same as the wettable powders that we have. So I'm not sure, but at some point I will do a large enough trial with it and get some of that to an extractor to find out whether or not that sulfur is carrying through on the concentrates. That's the main problem we see with the sulfur as a solution to the russet mites is your concentrate guys don't like it. Like you can taste it, you can smell it, it messes up your end product for concentrates. So again, it's one of those ones you kind of are going to have to be careful with, test out on your own, see if it works, see if you like it. There are other products that work really well for russet mites. There's something called Lost Coast Plant Therapy, which was actually created by one of my family friends here in Humboldt County. And it's amazing. I mean, I actually did a trial on the russet mites with that product specifically. It worked brilliantly. It's every 3 days for 2 weeks. I push it to 3 weeks on a russet because I actually do want to try and eradicate those. I don't want to just have to manage that population. I really want them gone. The problem with that is that at commercial scale level, it's really expensive.
Yeah, it's super expensive.
It's an expensive product. So at that point I was like, this doesn't work for us anymore in California. Our profit margins are just squeezed too little. So what other solutions do we have? And yeah, I think that the Jadam sulfur is going to end up being the one that works. That being said, I will be running more trials of that in my dirty room later on this year. And if anybody has broad mites, send me your broad mites. I've never had broad mites. It's the one pest that I'm like, I don't know what works and what doesn't on these guys because I've never had them. So if anybody has broad mites, okay, you don't have to send me the broad
Look
mites.
how excited she
let
gets.
me know. I know. Like, give me
your
your
bugs.
bugs. So that being said, you don't have to send me your broad mites. I will send you some product and an SOP if you want to trial it out. Again, this is not coming from any type of like, this is going to work great. This is coming from me saying like, let's find out whether it works or not. So yeah.
Okay. So as far as the Jadam book that you showed everyone, there's also a Jadam herb book that he put out in conjunction with that book. Can you explain to everyone why they need to be careful what they are actually using out of that handbook when they are making their own Jadam pesticides? Because I know the wetting agent, that's really standard. That's close to like a Castile soap, so that's pretty safe to use. But I know with the herbs, there people can run into some problems.
Yeah. People. So I don't feel like I ordered. It's called Jadam 100 Herbs. I think is
it's
the
green.
name of it, and it's the green book. Yep. So it looks very similar to the orange book, but it's green. So the green book is, like I said, I think I ordered it, but I don't know, maybe I did get it and I just have never actually used it. Because the truth of the matter is, for the most part with cannabis, I'm not interested in using things that may or may not work. There's a reason why the orange book has the herbs it does. And it's because those have been trialed by Yongsang Cho. He keeps texting me, sorry. Have been tested out by Master Cho's son, Yongsang Cho, and have proved to work really, really well against the specific bugs that he talks about. So in this book, he's like, aphids, here's your aphid protocol. Now, the thing with cannabis and the hemp aphid is this works really well. His protocol works great for your regular aphids. So like your peach aphid and your green apple aphid. I can't remember their names. There's a woolly aphid. There's all kinds of aphids. There's like cajillions of aphids out there, but they all tend to go to different specific plants. The hemp aphid is very specific in that it really is a hemp aphid. It doesn't tend to go to any other species of plants. That being said, could it? Yes, it could. Does it? Maybe it does. But in studies, they have not been able to infest other plants with this aphid, except for possibly hops, because they're similar enough species, hops and cannabis are. So, as far as I know, this is kind of a newer noxious pest for cannabis. So there's not as much studies about it as we would like to see. That being said, the JHS made out of Jerusalem artichokes with the JWA works really well. JWA alone tends to work pretty well as a knockback. But the thing I was going to say is that you have to increase the frequency and you have to increase the length of the duration that you're using it to actually get a good knockback effect on the hemp aphids. They just tend to breed really, really fast. They're kind of like they're the aphid on steroids, and they're difficult to maintain their populations because of that. So I think he talks about using it like every whatever it is, every X amount of time. And you want to increase that. I'm working on a pesticide, but a cannabis pest protocol booklet that I'm hoping to get done and have available for people at some time this spring. But I'm a slow worker sometimes. So when it comes to writing,
you have a lot on your plate.
I'm not. I like planting things. I like being in the garden. So sitting behind a computer and typing this stuff out is not my most chosen way to spend my time. So that being said, I am really trying to get this done because a lot of people ask me these questions a lot. And it would be really nice to just be like, here, go get the book. So, so basically it's ginkgo and JHS and Jerusalem artichoke JHS that work really well. The other herbs in that 100 book, like I know there's a lot of mints that he talks about. I've tried it. I don't think it works very well. The mint does not tend to be highly effective. Capsaicin, so making it out of hot peppers, also has not worked for me. Garlic has not worked for me. Really there's a ton of different herbs you can use. Most of them don't tend to be very effective. And if they are, they tend to be highly poisonous. So you can make this out of oleander. I don't really know what the effective part of oleander is, but knowing that in commercial cannabis, we have really, really high testing standards, you have to look into that herb and find out what the compound is that is the pesticidal property, and then know whether or not your state is testing for that. Because for example, pyrethrins come from chrysanthemums. You could probably make a pyrethrin JHS out of your own chrysanthemums, but in California, it's not allowed. So if I was to use that and spray it on my cannabis, I would fail testing and my whole crop would have to be destroyed. So you have to know what you're using, why you're using it, what what pest you're using it for. Does it work for that particular pest or not? And then you need to know what the compound is that's actually doing the killing. And then you need to know how that's going to interact with your testing protocols. So it's a lot of work, in my opinion. Save your money on the green book and just get the orange book. It's got the few ones in there that are, rated for use at these levels that work really well.
So, given that we're talking about spraying, talk about spraying in flower. What's a no-no, and what can you spray? Should you be spraying anything at all? When do you cut it down and burn it, as people like to say in the group?
burn it with fire.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to caveat this really quickly with the the wonderful thing that cannabis has decided is acceptable, which is the paint sprayer as a sprayer for pesticides and biologicals. And here's the thing. The problem with weed is that somebody does something and they think it's a great idea and they tell somebody, and then it just spreads like wildfire. And a lot of times it's not really good information. If paint sprayers were a great thing to apply any type of, farming stuff, be it fertilizer, pesticides, herbicides, whatever, if these were great for that, that's what horticulture would use. There's a reason why we have horticultural sprayers and they're not the same as paint sprayers. It has a lot to do with droplet size. It has a lot to do with your coverage. People are like, I get great coverage. And I'm like, you do, but it's also in this large drop and it's just not the same thing. So just spend the money and get a real horticultural sprayer. They have them. There's backpack sprayers, there's tow behind sprayers, there's big ones that you can mount on your quad. There's huge ones that are actually you put them on a flatbed of a truck. It all exists, and it exists for a reason, because it's the appropriate tool for the job. When I want to screw a screw in, I don't get a hammer, I get a screwdriver. When I want to hammer a nail, I don't get a screwdriver, I get a hammer. So use the right tool for the job, you guys. It's important. And that being said, when do we spray in flower? So, this is kind of one of those, you have to know your plant, you have to know your farm, you have to know what you're spraying and why you're spraying. So if I'm in week 4 of bloom and I get russet mites, I'm not going to not spray. I'm not going to be like, oh, well, we'll just ride it out for the next month. That's a poor choice, because it's not going to work out well for you. So in the case of a russet mite or some type of pest infestation, you're going to need to spray something. So what you spray is also going to depend on your level of infestation, your level of risk to, reward benefit. You're going to have to weigh that out and make your decisions about what you want to do. As far as other inputs for spraying in flower, we generally stop at about week 4, or when the buds are about the size of a quarter. That tends to be, for us in Humboldt County, kind of the appropriate time to move to a soil drench for any type of KNF fertilizers or anything like that. But I do know people that continue through the whole bloom process. But they also are larger scale farms that have, again, one of those horticultural sprayers that has a tiny fine mist. And so you're not adding a ton of humidity to your buds, because that becomes very problematic. That's when we see things like the botrytis and other bud molds and, problems along those side of things, is if you have a really, really wet flower that's then growing and propagating all of this, biology that we don't want on there. But again, it's kind of going to depend. Are you inside? Are you in a greenhouse? What's the humidity like? What kind of cultivars are you growing? Do you have things that are really prone to mold and mildew? If you do, you probably might want to stop earlier. If you don't, and you have things that are highly resistant, you can push it further. Liquid IMO is a great thing to spray for as long as you can, because it's the same thing that Dr. Elaine Ingham talks about with her compost tea. You're covering your leaf with all of this healthy biology. And because of that, you don't have a place for the pathogenic biology to actually take hold. So liquid IMO can be on that same side. However, with liquid IMO and even with compost teas, I'm always a little cautious because, again, with testing standards, you don't necessarily know what you're spraying on there. So if you make a bad compost tea and it's full of salmonella or E. coli and you spray that all over your flowers, you're now failing testing. If you get a collection of aspergillus in California, which, I think I'm pretty sure I've gotten some aspergillus. I've seen pictures now under my scope where I'm like, oh, that is totally an aspergillus mold. So, it's not a negative thing as long as you're not covering your flowers with it, because we have testing for a couple species of aspergillus. And if I accidentally spray one of those onto my flowers, I can fail testing. So again, there's going to be some caution involved with knowing, are you commercial or are you a home grow? And what are your testing regulations in your state? If you are commercial, what's your own level of comfort with, knowing that you're putting something on your bud? And it's just, it kind of is, unfortunately, it's just a case by case basis.
And some states
no
have
simple answer.
Overall microbial count. So even if you don't put,
Right.
A pathogen on your plant, you could fail your testing just spraying labs or something on your plant.
Yeah, total aerobic plate count is problematic. If you're in a state that is emerging and you guys are talking about testing and they're starting to make those regulations. So California, we had aerobic plate count at the beginning and we fought it. And as a community, we all said, you can't do this because we're organic farmers. And as organic farmers, we use compost tea and we use all of these indigenous microorganisms and we use these processes that are going to cause us to fail because we have beneficial biology happening on our plants. So you have to take that back. We have to have pathogenic only. And we, like I said, we did fight that and we got that changed at the local or at the state policy level. So, sorry, I've got business stuff coming in at the same time. So, so basically, I just got totally distracted by that text. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. I got.
What was I saying? Yeah, testing. Yeah, biology. Right. If you're in a state and you're talking about your testing regulations, make sure your voice gets heard and make sure it gets heard well. So get loud about what you want to see the testing look like in your state.
All right. So I know you guys had a bunch of fires this year and, well, every year for the last several years.
Still.
And I know you did some experimenting with bud washing. So outside of powdery mildew, which everyone seems to want to wash off of their plant after they harvest it, can you walk us through what you did and what you found to be the most successful for washing your cannabis when it needed to be? Because I know especially for some indoor growers, even though they don't realize it, their cannabis is pretty dirty. They're sucking in a lot of in-home dust and it's covering everything. And I know, people like Jonathan, they swear by bud washing, and then other people, they don't want anything to do with it. So you were kind of put in a position where you had no choice because of all the smoke and the ash this year. So I don't know if you could talk about that and how your testing went and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I'm not a fan of washing after the fact, but I also eat carrots out of the ground without washing them. So, my level of like dirtiness that is acceptable is high to me. Like I don't generally, like if I'm growing my food, I don't ever wash it. I mean, I'll knock the dirt off of the carrot and, maybe wipe it on my jeans a little bit, but all of that, all the microbes that are in our soil are actually really, really healthy for our gut biomes also. So I personally think that eating dirt is probably one of the best things we can do. That being said, this is also, native natural soil. This isn't inner city LA pollution dust, which I feel is kind of a different situation. So hopefully if you're in inner city LA and you're growing, you have some good carbon filters that are on your intakes, so you're not sucking all that stuff in and blowing it all over your weed. But if you are not doing that and you do have concern about, you know, your flower being dirty, I have tried a few different techniques. So there's one called Dr. Bud's bud washing tech, which was like the old school way of doing it. And you had 3 buckets, one that had lemon juice and baking soda together, one that has hydrogen peroxide, and then a few that are plain water. And what we found, and we have had to do that before, we had a late infestation of spider mites many years ago, and we just kind of like wrote it out because it was 2 weeks before harvest. And I was like, I'm not going to spray anything on it. We're just going to have to figure out what to do. So we did that technique. It got the spider mites off. There's dirt. There's a lot of stuff that comes off. It's kind of gross. But the problem we found was that something happens when you're removing all of the microbial population off of your plant material. And what we found is that it oxidizes it incredibly quickly. So 3 months after harvest, things were hung, they'd been dried, they'd been cured properly, they still smelled great, they still looked great, or didn't look great, they still smelled great, they still smoked great, but our buds turned brown really fast. So within 3 months, quality was dropped super low. We had to take a huge hit on price points. It was not a good situation. So after that, I was like, okay, was it just a weird year? Was it just like we did the whole, you know, that whole garden? So I don't know. I didn't know at that point whether it was maybe the cultivar, maybe it was this, maybe it was that. So at that point, then I did some trials and I said, okay, we're going to wash this one with the bud washing technique. We're going to wash this one with just plain water, and we're not going to mess with this one at all. And what we found was that, yeah, sure enough, that technique created oxidation really quickly. Plain water also creates oxidation. So we had things turning brown faster. It's also one of the reasons why back in the day, you didn't harvest in the rain. You waited for the rain to quit if you could. And I don't know really the science behind why this is, other than extra moisture somehow. I don't really know. I just know that it's not generally not good. I did talk with Jonathan about this, and he was talking, because we were talking about hydrogen peroxide, and I'm like, I tried plain hydrogen peroxide also this year, and I still see a color difference. It loses the bright green. It's not as bad as, like, it hasn't turned brown, but I can see visually the difference for certain. So, you know, he swears by it. He thinks it's great. But again, if it's for your personal grow, like, you don't have that contrast necessarily to look at. And, you know, if you're smoking it yourself, it's your head stash, it's for your friends, whatever. If it's out of your hands in a relatively short period of time, you might not have that baseline comparison of like, oh, this turned this color by this point and this didn't. So that's why doing these side-by-sides for me becomes really important, because I can actually have some data-driven resources that I can say visually, I can see that this oxidized about twice as fast as this one. So I'm not a proponent of washing after the fact. If you have to do it, sometimes you have to do it, and that's just what it is. And just know that you want to get rid of it really quickly and hopefully get it into people's hands before it turns color, and hopefully it gets consumed, and then it's not a problem. That being said, if you have to wash something, do it while your plant is still alive. It's a huge difference. So like you mentioned, the wildfires, California, we had literally ash raining down all over our gardens. And it was not just here, it was in Mendocino. And I mean, like, every garden I saw basically, you know, had issues because of the wildfires. So it was either smoke contamination, it was ash contamination. The main problem that I saw that was ubiquitous kind of across the state and across many states, including Oregon and Washington as well, was that the ash, which is basic, right? It has a pH that is really high. So it was creating an imbalance on the leaf surfaces and on the flower surfaces where powdery mildew was everywhere. I mean, people that are phenomenal cultivators, I would see pictures and I was like, ooh, that's not good. And I finally tracked it back and I was like, oh, it's absolutely the ash. What's happening is ash is coming down, the moisture from the dew in the mornings and the evenings is creating this kind of like shellac. We've had discussions about lye, because that's how you make lye, is with ash and water. But I don't think that was the problem. I think it was just basically the pH got super high. Powdery mildew was able to get in there and just wreak havoc. So I started doing some trials on my home grow to see how it worked. I was actually in Colorado at the grow I advised for with Chris Trump when all this was happening. And we sat down and talked about it. And I said, okay, you know, I'm literally getting photos from people of like, you know, burnt leaves and, you know, just it's a mess. And so we started talking about protocols for balancing the soil, which included nitrogen. And even though this was in, you know, August, September, October, that's when our fires were happening. Normally we would not put nitrogen on that late in the cycle, but I did some trials and I was shocked at how well it worked. Like the plants that I did not use this protocol on, using fish amino acid, and then maintenance solution basically, and magnesium as well. So we did Epsom salts, because the idea being the magnesium is going to balance the calcium from the ash, the nitrogen is going to balance the potassium from the ash, and that is going to, while it is, you know, a high nutrient solution now in our soil, it's a balanced solution at least. So the plant should be able to mitigate it better. And sure enough, it worked really well. So those plants actually busted out new growth, and the ash that was there was not really a problem, because the new growth didn't have ash on it. So I didn't have those pH balances. So those plants, I didn't even have to wash. It was great. The other plants though, that I was trying to figure out, like, I mean, I saw videos of people out with, you know, bamboo stakes, knocking their plants twice a day, and leaf blowers, and which was fun because you get to watch the ash fly up and then land on the plants right next door. I was like, I don't know that this is working so well either, you guys. I mean, it's all right, but you know. So I went back to my Korean natural farming and I said, all right, well, if I know that the ash is the problem and I know ash is basic, I want to add an acid, especially to rinse the ash off, because at that point, like you know, if you're a larger cultivation and you don't have a ton of employees, thinking that you're going to get out there and like brush the ash off twice a day for months, because it was months that we had these fires, it's just not realistic. So I was like, okay, we didn't get to it. We didn't have enough people. There's no way we could have mitigated that with that methodology. So what else do we have? So I went, all right, KNF, you know, one of the parts of almost every recipe is vinegar. So I'm like, vinegar is an acid. Let's try this out. And I ran a few different trials and found, I tried just plain water. That that didn't work, obviously, because it shellacked it on even worse. I was like, ooh, that was a bad choice. I tried some where I didn't mess with them at all to see what would happen at the end of the season. And then I tried one with a standard maintenance solution, which is 1 to 500 of fermented plant juice, 1 to 500 of brown rice vinegar, and 1 to 1,000 of oriental herbal nutrient. And it was okay. It kind of worked, but it didn't really work great. So then I said, all right, let's just increase the vinegar by tenfold. So I did 1 to 100 vinegar, and then 1 to 500 FPJ, 1 to 1,000 of OHN. And that worked better. And then I followed that up with a water rinse, because at that point I was like, all right, I'm not getting enough of it to actually wash the ash off, but it's loosening it. So when so when I then followed that up with a water, the ash completely washed off, and the powdery mildew that was starting to set in also got mitigated as well. So all of a sudden, I was one of the few farmers I saw that didn't have powdery mildew problems. I didn't have mold problems. You know, for the full term gardens that were in ground and, you know, treated this way, it was a phenomenal success. I was really, really happy. And then any of that solution that washed off onto the ground was just a soil conditioner and a nutrient for the soil and the microbes there as well. So it was brilliant. I was really, really happy with it.
And it neutralized all that ash, so you didn't really change your pH too much. All right, walk everybody through your dry farm. What's a dry farm? What are you doing with that? Because I'm sure some people are like, what the fuck is she talking about?
So And I love this because I say a dry farm is just, it's a farm that you don't irrigate, and people are like at all, like you don't water at all. I'm like, you do not water at all. You can water your plants in when you plant them, but that's it. You do not water after that. So there's been a lot of studies and a lot of trials of this in Israel, because they don't have a lot of water out there. Mostly it's been on wheat, not other crops. That being said, Humboldt County actually has a really solid dry farm history. So there's a gentleman whose name I'm forgetting right now, Bob Reynolds, I think, maybe, could be his name. He's in a little area called Shively, and he's been there for many decades, and he has been teaching people there how to do dry farming. So there's a few different farms. Highwater Farms, who's Crystal Ortiz, she has a dry farm there. Sunshine Johnston, who's Sunbolt, has a dry farm there. And then Jane is, something medicinals. Sorry, Jane, I can't remember what your farm is called. Something medicinals. If you Google dry farm or Instagram dry farm, search for that, it'll probably pop it up. And so they have been utilizing this for quite some time now. And Bob, I believe, like I said, I hope I'm Bill Reynolds. Anyway, whatever his name is, just not my day for remembering people's names, apparently. He doesn't do cannabis, or he didn't. I don't know if he does now, but he has actually done breeding genetics specifically for different watermelons and different tomatoes. So the Blue Beauty tomato, I believe, is one of his cultivars that he bred specifically for dry farming, I think. And then there's also like something called an ice cream watermelon that's for dry farming. So what's happening is you're planting your plant, you're not irrigating, and you're just letting it do its thing. You can't do it everywhere. You have to have the right soil texture, and you have to have the right methodology. You don't necessarily have to be on a water table, but you do. And I'm reluctant to say this because I haven't trialed it out. So I don't think you need to even be near the water table, as long as your soil texture is correct and can hold moisture in a certain way. So there's all kinds of like techniques with this stuff, but for the most part, what you're doing is you're allowing and this is the other thing, people think that the tap root's going down and following the water table down, and that's not actually what's happening. What's happening is your water table is actually wicking up to the surface. So it's a total trip. It's really interesting. You end up with a dust mulch layer. So the top part of your soil is dry and dusty, and there's nothing growing on it. We don't companion plant it with this. We don't have living mulches. All you want is your cash crop. That's it. You don't want anything else there competing for that water. So you're out there and you have to hula ho to keep all of the weeds down, making sure that there's nothing else growing but the cash crop. And then that top layer has to be exposed to sun. So it's very counterintuitive to what we normally do, right?
Definitely.
We normally want mulch. We want water. You want to be able to maintain everything at this moisture level. And this is really opposite. You actually want a hot, dry layer, because what that does is it creates almost like an inversion layer where the cooler water from down below is moving up to that hot, dry layer. And it'll evaporate or get utilized before it hits that top layer. But your plant's roots are not in the top layer. They're actually down in the bottom, below the top layer where the water is. So it's cool. It's really, really fun. I'm really excited to hopefully do that this year and utilize natural farming using KNF inputs to try and make sure that my soil is super healthy. And if I need to feed my plants, that's how you do it. You don't water fertilizer in. Usually you want everything to be in the ground already, so you're not doing anything, but knowing that I have this really good methodology for foliar feeding nutrients that if it gets into the ground, it's not going to be a problem, is kind of my backup plan should this whole dry farming thing fail drastically.
Okay, so now we've touched on KNF a bunch of times. Now it's time to push buttons.
I already know where this is going.
Yeah, you know where this is going. All right, so there's a lot of people that post in the OC group about things that have to be addressed a lot. And
I love you guys. I love you all. I do. I really, really do. I promise I do.
So first one is, let's talk about FFJ. Well, do you want to talk about
Mm-hmm.
FFJ or bananas first? I guess they're kind of the same thing. So, you know, I guess you could just
Talk
address
about
them both
avocado
at the
tech
same
too when we
time.
get there.
Oh, yeah, we'll talk about avocados next.
Yeah, great. So, all right. FFJ, fermented fruit juice. Okay. FFJ is so this is the thing. I realize I do this a lot. I start sentences and then I like drop them off and go I'm like tying it in. Horrible.
The
Sorry,
problem
y'all.
is there's so much going on with natural farming and all the inputs. Once you start talking about
Yeah.
one, you feel like you have to touch on all these things. So,
Yeah, exactly. And my brain is like 5 feet ahead of my mouth. So
yeah.
sometimes I'm trying to catch up with myself here. So fermented fruit juice is an input that is meant for ripening. So it specifically is to ripen your fruits. That's what its process is. So you have to know why you're utilizing something, what you're utilizing it for. We don't grow fruit with cannabis. It's a flower. It's not a fruit unless you're doing it as a seed project. And even then, you're not really like ripening so much. So it's an enzyme is what you're doing. You're basically taking these ripe fruits that have high enzymatic properties and you're extracting those enzymes. And what those enzymes do is they'll actually help fruits ripen. They'll help, Brix levels rise and things like that. But as far as my trials have shown, FFJ is a total waste of time for cannabis. It just doesn't help. And I've had this discussion. There are people who swear that it increases the terpenes. But as of yet, nobody has shown me a side by side with testing that proves without a doubt that, it does increase the terpene content. And what I've seen is that it does not. We are going to be running a larger scale trial because these are things that I do on small levels for the most part to just prove out. And generally, when I disprove it, I don't take it any further. But people are just they're hell bent that this works really well. So I'm like, all right, fine. We're going to do it this year for real at a larger scale. So it's the first trial we'll be doing in our light deprivation. We'll be breaking one cultivar into thirds. 1/3 is going to get fermented fruit juice at the last 2 weeks, which is generally when we would use this on other crops. So like I do use it on my tomatoes. I use it on my melons and, the other foods that I do. And it works great for that. But like I said, for cannabis, it didn't seem to make any difference. So last 2 weeks, you use it like once or twice is all, and it enhances ripening. So we'll do that as prescribed by Natural Farming KNF methodology. We're going to do one section that will be utilizing fermented fruit juice for the entire bloom cycle. I'm going to have to do 4 sections. Yep. We'll be doing one that will be using FFJ, FPJ, which is what I like to do, fermented plant juice. I don't use the fermented fruit juice. I stick with some traditional recipes. And then 1/3 will get a control group that will just be water. It won't have any KNF inputs at all. So we'll be testing that. We'll test the cannabinoids, we'll test the terpenes, and we will have some actual data. These will be done on clones. So we're limiting the variable. The only variable that we're going to be playing with is fermented fruit juice for, the end of cycle, fermented fruit juice for the entire bloom cycle, fermented plant juice, and plain water as our control. So we'll see. I pretty much already know what's going to happen, but maybe I'm wrong. You never know.
Okay, now tell
That's
everyone your
my
beef
little.
with bananas.
Yeah. All right. Beef.
Because
Beef is
everyone
great.
likes to make
I love beef.
banana water out of peels or try to
Banana
make
tea peel,
FFJ
banana peel
with
tea.
bananas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm guilty of this myself. Like when I started diving into, natural to KNF, I went to the store and I bought a shit ton of bananas and I made banana FFJ and it ended up being pancake syrup and it was delicious. But it did not go on my plants. I think I still have a gallon of it actually back in the back somewhere.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So I have issues with basically with sustainability and with the choices that we make as a species and how that relates And I get into arguments and people call me biased and people call me names, and I don't care. You guys can call me whatever you want. I absolutely, the fuck jar is empty. Sorry, don't care. Because the reality of the situation is I live in a world that I have to share with all y'all. So when you say that your produce choices don't impact me, bullshit. They impact everybody. If you choose, and I do buy bananas, okay? I'm not saying I'm freaking holier than thou. I'm not better than everybody else. I make personal choices too. And my 6-year-old loves bananas. So I do buy bananas now and then. That being said, I buy it with, real issues because, oops, hang on. Burp. Sorry, got a call coming in. There we go. All right. So when I'm looking at how I purchase things, what do I spend my money on? One of the things I take into consideration at a very, very, very high level is what is the carbon footprint of this particular thing that I'm buying. So again, I will buy bananas now and then. I don't like to do it because they're not grown where I live. They are trucked across thousands of miles to get to my store, to get to me, so that my little one can enjoy it. Eventually, at some point, I have the feeling our world will be changing and maybe bananas will not be even available anymore at all. So, she can have them now and I'll do it with chagrin, but at any rate. So again, looking at these things like these carbon footprints, looking at, oh, these grapes are from Chile. Maybe that's not the best choice right now. Maybe you should choose something that was grown locally. Maybe you should just go without so that your children and my children and everybody else's children can have a planet later on. It's such a selfish way to live your life, only thinking about your own needs and your own wants. That being said, with the bananas, not only is it a high carbon footprint, the banana industry is probably one of the worst industries as far as large scale production and worker conditions. They're not good. Bananas are also one of the most heavily pesticided plants ever. They're all monocropped. Most of them are Cavendish. I don't know how to pronounce it. I can spell it, but it's a specific species. Bananas are all grown from clones. So we have a lack of biodiversity in our bananas out there for the most part that are bought at the store. And that's caused problems. There was a fungus that attacked the banana plantains because it is growing. People weren't growing other types of bananas. It was just this one kind. So, we're looking at are not really a great choice. And then we also have things. So with cannabis, again, we love great. If we want to maybe there was a slump in banana sales way back in the day and they got a hold of the organic growers and they said, hey, bananas are a great source of potassium. And all the banana growers went, yay, let's make banana peel tea. When you look into banana peels, they have 42 milligrams per gram or per kilo, 42 grams per kilogram or 42 milligrams per accumulate certain nutrients. And you can find ones that have high levels of potassium that you can grow. Again, we're back to this closing loop idea. Instead of purchasing something at the store, grow something to utilize for that thing that you want. And that's really where I have this huge push for people, is that look into what you're doing, look into why you're doing it, and then find a better choice. There are tons of them out there that are not going to impact our planet as much as making a banana peel tea. So, that's my little soapbox on bananas.
So my Zoom quit out a couple times and it stayed recording, so hopefully all that was in there. But
that's okay if not. You can search banana peel on the OC group.
Yeah, it'll be on there. And trust me, there'll be a rant on the website when that goes live. There'll be a whole section.
There will be. I'm gonna have a Wendy's opinion corner, and it's just gonna be me bashing things, and then you guys can just get really mad at me, and we'll duke it out, and eventually 100%. We'll all sit down and smoke weed together, and it'll be amazing.
All right, so let's talk feeding your worms with avocados. Why is that a waste of time?
So, I'm sorry that you all love the avocado tech. First first of all, is it really tech? It's not tech. Technology, it's a fucking avocado peel. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I went off last night on this because I have, again, major issues with buying something in the store that got trucked thousands or hundreds of miles that you are then putting into your soil. You don't need to do this, you guys. You're overcomplicating a simple system. You want to feed your plants, feed the soil, but don't feed it food that you're buying. Like you don't, I mean, I don't, where this came from, this wonderful idea that we should go to the store to buy things like an avocado to feed the worms. Worms eat garbage. That's their job. It's what they do. You can use anything. If you're going to buy an avocado, eat the avocado, and you can fill the skin with other stuff if that's what you want to do. You can use eggshells. Eggshells make a great worm home. You know, I mean, there's just so many other choices. And again, it's this whole idea of, you know, this is where my produce doesn't affect you came in. As somebody said, my choices in produce doesn't affect you. And I'm like, it sure as shit does. I'm sorry, but last time I looked, we have one planet and we all live here together. So everybody's choices affect everybody else. So if you're going to be wasting the energy that it took to grow that avocado to feed your worms, I'm not ever going to condone that. I'm going to speak out against it every time because it's ridiculous.
And again, it comes down to it being shipped around the world and the conditions of the workers, yes, and all that stuff plays into it as well.
If you live in Hawaii or Mexico or San Diego even, and you're growing tons of bananas and you're growing tons of avocados and they're full. I mean, I lived in Maui. The freaking avocados and mangoes would hit the roof, metal roof, bang, and roll down, thump, and they'd hit the ground, right? It was crazy. It was super, super annoying. So if that's your situation, yeah, sure, feed it to the worms if you're not going to eat it or sell it. Like, that's fine, you know? But the reality is we live in a world where food is a precious resource. And I mean, when I think about how much time and energy I put into growing things, if I sold that to somebody and I knew that they were feeding that to their worms, I would not be very happy about that. I'd be like, that's a lot of time and energy that I put into growing this really nutritious food for you to eat, and you gave it to the worms. Like, give the worms your compost, give the worms your spoiled food. If you open the avocado and it's a crappy avocado, sure, feed that to the worms. But when you look into this method of doing things also, like, you don't just cut the avocado and stick it on the ground. They're actually mixing usually some type of dried amendment into it. And I can't quite wrap my head around who decided this was such a wonderful idea. Like, if you're gonna use nutrients, just use them the traditional way and put them in the soil. Why would you want them all in one little spot where your worms eat it? And then the idea is the castings are, I mean, maybe I'll just need to look into it more to understand it better, but
you just opened yourself to all kinds of attack with that statement.
Oh, of course I did. And I'm fine with that. I don't care. You guys can,
that's all right.
You know,
we love
you
debate.
Can absolutely send me messages and tell me why I'm super fucking wrong on this, and I will read them and I will look into it. But, you know, as far as it sits for me, again, even if it's an amazing tech, and even if your worms are distributing your micronutrients throughout your soil better than it would if you watered them in or tilted them in, which again doesn't really make sense to me, but whatever, let's just go on the assumption it does.
Coverage.
It's some, you know, it's kind of where I come from. Like, I like to spread things evenly and not just have little weird pockets, but let's assume that all of that is really happening. I still am going to take issue with the fact that you're wasting food. I'm still going to take issue with the fact that you're buying something in a store that was meant for human consumption, that has a huge carbon footprint, that you're using to feed your soil, or feed your worms, I should say. Like, you just don't need to go to that extent. And we share a planet. We share a planet. I live on this planet with you. Your choices impact me. So maybe it's the best thing since sliced bread. Worms love bread, by the way. Who knew? Yeah, lots of people did, actually. So even if this is something that you're adamant is super amazing, like, fine, do a side-by-side. Use avocado tech on 6 of them, and use 6 of them with your dried amendment that you're spreading out evenly, but no avocado, and do 6 that you don't do any of the above on, and prove it to me. Like, Seriously, do the actual work to actually prove out the thing or to disprove it. And what I found is after, 30 plus years of cannabis cultivation, most of the stuff that people do actually doesn't increase your plant health, vigor, cannabinoids, terpenes, any of that. Most of that is genetics. Most of that is soil health. Most of that is just as simple as that. Get good genetics, get good soil health, get real, true living soil, not a 3-gallon pot with worms in it, because that's awesome and that's rad and that's good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that those are bad choices. What I'm saying is like, keep doing better. Push yourself to make those steps to get more and more sustainable. We're not in a sustainable world anymore at all. We have to get to this beyond sustainable and back into regenerative, into the place where we are changing the climate back the way that we can all survive in it for the next foreseen centuries. So, when you're choosing avocados and bananas and you live in Saskatchewan, you're making bad choices that is literally destroying our planet. So make better choices.
Okay, so if you shouldn't be buying fruits from the store to make FFJ, where should people be getting their fruits and their plants for FPJ? And I know a lot of people don't realize, but when you're making FPJ or FFJ, like for me, FFJ here on my property, I use my cucumbers. I use the wild blackberries that grow. I use the peppers that I grow. Those are the fruits that I use. We have an apple tree, so I've used the apples before. And for my FPJ, I like stinging nettle because it grows around here. I let it grow everywhere.
I do too.
So what should people be doing, especially in the winter time? When they just found out about KNF yesterday and they want to make all this stuff because it's fun and exciting. What do you recommend? What's the course forward for them?
Winter is so hard because for some reason I'm one of them too, that I really, really got into it and it was like, oh, it's like, yeah, not the right season. You got to learn to be patient. One of the staples of natural farming is right timing, and that includes making your inputs, and it's rough. So do OHN, because OHN, you're going to have to buy those inputs anyway. You have to, for the most part, we have to buy cinnamon, angelica, licorice root, vodka, beer, all that stuff. So start with that. That's an easy one. Do FAA, from fish amino acid. That's one you can do in the winter. You can do IMO collections depending on where you are. You can actually bring things inside and do these winter collections. I don't recommend starting with that though. IMO is the hardest part. Indigenous microorganism collections is really, that's the learning curve that's really steep. So if you're trying to start in the winter, you might get, I've seen this happen multiple times where people just get super discouraged and they don't want to keep doing it. And they're like, this is not for me. This is too hard. I don't want to do it. So don't start IMO in the winter if you've never done it before. Just get patient, do OHN, do FAA. You can do WCAP and WCA, so water soluble calcium phosphate and water soluble calcium. Those are great ones to do in the winter. For fermented fruit juice, specifically, if you're going to grow something other than cannabis and you want to have a ripening enhancement solution, that's where your fermented fruit juice comes into play. And yeah, grow something for it. I mean, most people that have a garden have produce from that garden that gets overripe, so you can use that. It's not a traditional fruit like a cherry or a plum. Like any fruiting body is a fruit. So
Tomatoes are
like
great.
You mentioned cucumbers, tomatoes. Tomatoes are a bit acidic. I don't know that I personally would do an FFJ out of tomatoes unless I was only using it on tomatoes. But that's just me. That's my personal thing. Citrus is only used on citrus. Persimmons on persimmons, grapes on grapes. Those are the three things that you only use the FFJ from those plants on those plants. So they can't be cross-contaminated with other things or with other plants. Not cross-contaminated, but don't utilize them for other plants. So grow something. I mean, the great thing about cannabis, right, is that most of us are growing that, and it's growing up, and you have a layer underneath. You have an undercarriage, if you will, that is an open space. So you can use companion plants. You can do things like dichondra or clover, walking thyme. I don't know if I would do thyme as a fermented fruit or fermented plant juice. purslane is great. Purslane is a wonderful companion plant that you can then utilize to make an FFJ with as well.
It grows everywhere.
So grows everywhere, reseeds readily, super juicy. It's a great one. You can go to the ocean if you live near the ocean and use seaweed to make an FPJ. So that's one of my go-tos. It's my favorite FPJ ever is seaweed. It's amazing.
And you're
Super
eating
good stuff
that?
in there.
You're eating the seaweed FPJ?
I've eaten all of my inputs except for the mouse amino acid, which.
Okay, well that's gross. How's the seaweed FPJ taste?
Oh, it's disgusting.
Okay, all right, that's what I was getting at.
Yeah, I mean, you're not taking it in large amounts, so it's okay. But it's my favorite one to use on my plants. It's not my favorite one to eat. And all
the natural farming inputs, when we're talking about KNF, they're all edible. They can all be taken. So
it is all meant for human health as well as plant health, which is one of the reasons why I love it, because I'm like, this is super safe. Like I can get this all over. I don't have to worry about it. It's not something that I'm like, oh gosh, go wash your hands right away and call the doctor because you poisoned yourself inadvertently because you got something on you. I'm also like, I'm a little bit clumsy at times. So like I tend to get things all over me. Like, so, I want to make sure that when I do, I don't have to worry about it. I'm just like, oh yeah, whatever. I just lick it off. You're fine.
So what are you taking every day from your natural farming inputs for human health?
I take OHN twice a day. So Oriental Herbal Nutrient. I do that in the morning and the evening. I take LAB, lactic acid bacteria serum. I eat the cheese from the lab, so the curds are super yummy. That's it for daily inputs. Like really, it's just kind of those ones. How much
are you taking of that stuff?
LAB, I do about a tablespoon a day, give or take. And then the OHN, I do an ounce in the morning and sometimes so right now, cold and flu and COVID season, I take an ounce in the morning and an ounce in the evening. Come summertime, when we're not in, virus season anymore, I'll probably back that down to just once at night. So, but there are people that just do a few drops. There are people that do a few sprays. For me, it's easy. I have a little shot glass that sits over by a pump container, and I just pump a few pumps into my shot glass and down the hatch.
Okay, so let's talk about the preparing the stuff and storing some of the inputs. So OHN, when you make OHN and you're pouring it out, a lot of times there's sediment left in the bottom of the jars. Is that something that people should be worried about? And if it's not, do you shake up your jars really good before you're taking the OHN to make sure you're getting all that sediment? Because a big part of that is, micronizing all of that stuff. So I would imagine over time it's continuing to break down, and that's not something that people should be worried about, right?
No, yeah. I don't think it matters either way. I shake mine. I make sure that the sediment is all mixed back in, because that's basically some, solids that have precipitated out. Usually it's from the garlic and the ginger.
Yeah.
But yeah, I shake
sure.
mine, make sure it's all nicely mixed in there. But if you don't want to, I don't know that it matters which direction really.
Should people be using turmeric for their OHN?
No. And no.
Okay. And no. What about if you want to do it for your health and you're not using it on your plants?
It's fun. I mean, so the thing is, can you do it? Yes, absolutely. You can. You can add turmeric to it. Should you do it? I don't know. I mean, maybe, I guess. But what you've done is you have made not OHN. You have made OHN plus a turmeric tincture. It's not OHN anymore. So Oriental Herbal Nutrient, there's 5 herbs, and they're specific herbs, and they're specific for reasons. They're all warming. They all increase your circulatory system. They're anti-pathogenic. It's just all of these things, antimicrobial. Like, it's basically this wonderful tincture that has all of these really great immune boosters. And it's based on Chinese medicine. So this is not something that, somebody came up with randomly and went, oh, it sounds like a great idea. Like, can you use other things? People are like, well, there's other herbs that are warming also in Chinese medicine. And I'm like, yes, but these 5 synergistically work together in a very specific method. And I'm not going to go into the science behind that, but just trust me that it does. This is Chinese method. This is Chinese medicine, pardon me. And Chinese medicine has been around, forever. And it's not something that, for me personally, it's not something I take lightly. Like, this is something that came about specifically in this way for really, 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 really good reasons. And it's not really our place as Americans to be tinkering with that. Now, that being said, if you want to tinker with it and you want to add and supplement and, substitute things, can you? Yes, sure, you can. But in that case, I also recommend you make traditional OHN and, again, run side by side. You can't just say, I did this and it worked great. Well, how do you know? Did you do it the way that we're prescribed, the way that we have been taught to do it? Did you do it the traditional way? Do you have something that proves that the way that you did it works as well or better? If you don't have that, this was the weed growing, back in the day, it was like, oh, buy this $500 a gallon bottle of stuff that smells like rotted cauliflower. And it's amazing. And I had people that were like, it's so great. And I'm like, but did you use it on everything? Well, yeah. And it was amazing. Yeah. Well, it was an amazing year. Everybody crushed it this year. Like, I don't know that it was your $500 jug of whatever the heck that is. It just maybe was a really good year. So, like I said, like even 30 years ago, I was running side by sides. I was like, this is a really expensive nutrient line. Let's see how it stacks up. Does it actually do better than some traditional organic farming methodology using manure and tea? Or does it not? And if it does, and I actually know that my price point increased and my yield increased, and I made more than $500, which is the money I spent, then it became something that I would implement into my garden. And if it didn't, which 99 times out of 100 it didn't, then I could, really definitively say that actually didn't work. That actually made no difference whatsoever. And all that did was suck up $500. So, again, just I can't stress enough that people need to be doing your trials. You need to know for sure whether what you're spending your money and your time and your energy on is actually producing success or not. So it's important.
So what natural farming inputs are you actually using on your farm? Do you use all of them? What kind, what technique are you using?
I don't anymore. So this is the thing that I'm a little loath to tell people because it sounds, I'm loath to tell people this because I don't want you guys doing it, because this is not what works for everybody. My farm happens to be in the same place that it's been for 15 years. The soil has moved around a bit, right? I talked about that, about ripping out my beds and, getting the native soil turned in and things like that. But for the most part, except for the new garden area as well. But for the most part, this, my farm has been there for a decade and a half, hasn't really changed. It hasn't shifted that much. So the soil health is at a different level than where most farms are at, or where most grows are at, or, you've got pots that are 3 gallons and you're switching your soil every time. These are different systems. They work differently. So for us on our farm, I use IMO. So, and that's about it. I use the seed soak solution to start my starts, and I will use maintenance solution when I transplant. But otherwise, that's kind of all I do. I do have the whole gamut of FPJ, OHN, WCA, WCAP, WSK. I got all kinds of stuff for if I need it. But what I found is that for the most part, I don't really need it anymore. I'm not really utilizing these things to feed the plants because there's my microbiome that's in the soil is so active and so healthy that it's actually able to get everything it needs out of the soil itself. And I don't have to chase my nutrients at all. They're in the dirt. The dirt is activated by the microbes. The microbes are then feeding it to the plant, and the plant is super happy and stoked, and I don't need to do a whole lot to it.
What kind of amending are you doing every year?
Not a lot anymore.
Do you do soil testing?
Nitrogen, manure. I do soil testing. So, and it's amazing. Our soil tests, really our native soil is rocking. It's fabulous soil. We have just about everything we need in there, with the exception of nitrogen. Nitrogen is the one thing we need to add every year. So, but again, this is my farm. So it's different than your farm, and it's different than, somebody's indoor grow, and it's different than a greenhouse. And, I've found that we just have really healthy plants. And the truth of the matter too is, like, we've got our genetics dialed in, we've got our SOPs dialed in. For the most part, this all becomes really, really simple and easy. And I probably could get a little better yield if I was using the solutions that natural farming prescribes. But for the most part, like, I would rather be hanging out in the middle of the garden, just kicking it in the sunshine, or swimming in the pond, or playing with my kids, or, doing something else that's fun for me, or, cutting down wood to be prepared for the winter, fixing my fences. I homestead as well as farm. So it's like I have 2 large properties to take care of. So if I can avoid going out and spending 5 hours once a week spraying, and it doesn't end up creating such a financial boost that it's just not worth it, then I'm going to choose to do other things with my time.
All right. So what advice do you have for new growers?
New growers in general?
Yep. People who are just getting into cannabis. Right. And I would assume that a lot of them don't grow vegetables. Seems like a lot of the people that we deal with start growing cannabis and haven't ever grown anything before. So, where should they start?
Totally a gateway drug, by the way. It's a gateway plant. Most cannabis growers that I know end up growing vegetables too. So grow some food. I mean, honestly, that is one of my best pieces of advice, is grow some food. Put some freaking potatoes in your beds. Plant some carrots. Carrots are an awesome companion plant. Like, it's easy to sprinkle some carrot seeds in with your weed. Like, do that. That's fun. That's great. And then you're in there and you can pull it out of the ground and be like, weed grown carrots. Great. So grow food, and use beds. Use beds, build beds, people, build beds. I can't stress it enough. Like, I know this again from experience from doing this. The second we transitioned away from those stupid 3-gallon pots and into beds, our yield increased 20 to 33%, depending on which garden it was. So this is indoor. Well, it's outdoor also, actually, now that I think about it. But this specifically was indoor when we transitioned away from pots and into beds. It's amazing what a difference it makes. So get rid of your pots, reuse your soil. I don't know why people are still doing the throwing out the soil thing. It makes me really sad. Like, again, we're just talking about the carbon footprint of making soil and then throwing out. I don't know why people do that. You don't have to throw your soil out. Get away from bottled nutrients if you can. If you can't get away from bottled nutrients, at least go for organic bottled nutrients. At the very, very least, do that. And again, if you're using chemical salt-based fertilizers, you do have to, you got to do something to your soil. You can't continue to reuse it with that, because you're basically poisoning your soil. You don't have microbiology in there. I know there's a lot of products out there now that are microbiology products, like Mammoth P, right? Which is basically bugs in a jug or micro bugs in a jug. I don't know what to call it. But you have biology in there, and that's great. But when you look at it, you look at the bottle. You have to continually use it. You're continually putting it into your soil, because what you're doing is you don't have a balanced soil food web going on, which means that you don't really have living soil. You've got pseudo living soil. I know that Scott Skims has done some trials on what living soil, like what size, what volume of soil you need to have in order to have a real living soil. And he definitively proved, pretty much with I think at least one study, but I believe there was a couple of them, that the 65-gallon pot was the first one that he saw a decent soil biology going on in. Anything smaller than that, and it wasn't there. So you have to have a certain volume of soil. It might be less than that. Like, you know, again, this is kind of going to depend on how you're treating your soil, how you're treating your plants, what conditions you're growing in, all of that. But for the most part, increasing your volume of soil is going to increase your plant health. So get away from the pots. Smart pots, not great for water consumption, not great for, they tend to, I don't know, I had real issues with those. They're great for planting potatoes, or mint, things that you don't want to go invasive all over your garden. I do reuse some of mine for that. I finally figured out what I'm going to do with some of them this year, which is ripping them up. I'm going to put them under my driveway where I park, so that when I put the rock on, it won't get eaten by my mud all the time.
Yeah.
So that's a great use for smart pots. But as far as it sits, like, it's just, they're not efficient ways to cultivate. And I see the huge ones, right? I've seen the pictures of like the 1,000-gallon smart pot sitting on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, why would you just not dig a hole? Why would you not just amend your soil? I mean, it can take years to, you know, condition your soil to the point that it's easy to grow in. But if you're using KNF and you're getting your indigenous microorganism collections and you're increasing your fungal dominance, it shortens that time drastically. So instead of a few years, instead of, you know, 10 years or something, it can be like in 1 or 2 years. It can be a much faster transition if you're treating your soil appropriately.
Now, touching back on IMO, why don't you tell everyone about the awesome fungus that you guys
Yes.
found?
Yes. Okay, so this is really cool. So check it out. There is a type of fungi out there in nature, and it is called nematophagus. Oh, I had to look up the pronunciation, and now I'm blowing it.
It could be said each way, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, it's all pretty nematophagus.
Whatever. I've heard Lowenfels say rhizophagus, rhizophagus a bunch of times, so
right. My usual go-to is, if you just say it with confidence, people will like buy it that's how you pronounce it, right? But so nematophagus, nematophagus. Yeah. So nematophagus fungi is a type of fungus that is really, really cool because it actually will attack and eat nematodes. So, you know, unfortunately, if you have nothing but beneficial nematodes, you might not want this stuff in there. But if you have any type of root feeder or anything, it's a great thing to find in your soil. So we were in Colorado. I was there with Chris Trump, and we were scoping their soil, and we were looking at all the beds. There's 30 beds. So we had 30 soil samples that we were looking at, plus some that were just like extra stuff that was fun to look at. And I was zooming around on the slide, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, well, that looks different. Like, what am I looking at? And I'm like, this is really weird. It's a fungal strand that has loops on it. And it had 4 different loops, like 1, 2, 3, 4 stacked down the line. And I sat there, I almost scrolled past it. I was almost like, well, that was weird, whatever. And I was like, no, this is something interesting. So I called Chris over, and he looked, and he was like, oh my God, it's one of those nematode eating fungi. This is so cool. So we got some really good pictures of it. And what happens is these fungal hyphae have these loops on them that are made up of 3 different cells. And when a nematode swims through those cells, they'll swell up really quickly and capture the nematode. It will then like basically strangle the nematode and inject its spores. Some of them do different things. Some of them will actually like create hyphae that goes into the nematode and like eats it that way. Some of them put spores into it. And there's a ton of these different fungi out there. So that one's a trapping one. They have ones that have toxins. So it's a fungal strand that will like sting the nematode basically and like paralyze it and kill it and then digest it. There are ones that have little spiky balls, like one of those like medieval weapons like that it like smacks the nematode. Yeah, like a mace, like it smacks the nematode with it. They have ones that are sticky, so the nematode will swim into it and get stuck. It's the coolest thing ever. I went down this insane rabbit hole of checking this out. And apparently they're really hard to propagate in captivity, if you will. So like, this isn't something you can buy. These aren't spores that you can get like mycos or something, right? Where you're inoculating your beds with it. They're just either there or not, and they're not going to be in potting soil. So it definitely came from the indigenous microorganism collections that these guys have been doing. And it was a really, really cool find. It was super neat to look into. And one of the things I just discovered last night is that there is a type of shaggy mane mushroom that has this is a part of its morphology, is this mycelium that has I think that one was the ball, the mace looking ball, or else it might have been a toxin. I can't quite remember. I just looked into it. It's I don't remember the Latin name for it either, but if you look up nematophagous fungi shaggy mane, there's some cool studies about it. And that one seems to be one of the ones that possibly is easiest to inoculate with. But the cool thing is that I've seen pictures of the grow with the mushrooms that are growing, and I swear I'm pretty sure I've seen some of these like shaggy mane type mushrooms in their cultivation. So if you see those out there in nature, or if you see them in your grow, there's a chance maybe that in the soil it has this morphology of this nematode catching mycelium. It's cool. I'm such a nerd. Oh my gosh, you guys. I'm a total like mushroom dork.
All right, so a couple things before we wrap up. Fungus gnats and watering, because that seems to be a real hot topic lately.
Stop overwatering. Stop overwatering. I have it in cut and paste on my notes. Stop overwatering. Yeah, fungus gnats. I mean, and I argue with people all this time because they're always like, oh, well, I got fungus gnats. I'm like, stop overwatering. I didn't. You did. You overwatered. It's okay. It happens to everybody. It's fine. Just stop doing that. And then I've had people say like, well, I let it dry out and they didn't go away. And I'm like, you have to, it takes a little time for things to catch up. This is one of the things we see with cannabis a lot is people, they do one thing and then the next day they're like, it didn't work. Throw more things at it. And I'm like, you just stop. Give it a second. Okay. If you find yourself in a hole, the best thing you can do is put the shovel down and stop digging. Give your plant a little bit of time. Give your soil a little bit of time. You've got fungus gnats. Yeah, sure. You can put nematodes in there. Yeah, sure. You can water in. Actually, a great product is SNS, Sierra Natural Systems. I don't remember the number. It's not the 209. I think it's the 213. We had good success with that in that it got rid of the fungus gnats, and it has rosemary oil and rosemary extract. It's the one that has the oil and the extract. That's the one that worked best. But that being said, the reality is don't waste your money. Just stop overwatering. Let your soil go through a few periods and cycles of drying out. It's the moisture that they're after. So yeah, you can put BT in there. You can use mosquito dunks. There's all kinds of things you can do. But the reality is you've created an imbalanced soil, and that's why you have fungus gnats. So get your soil back in balance. Again, get rid of your pot and get it into a bed. You're going to have less problems there. And then just pay attention to your soil moisture. It's probably the hardest part of farming is getting your moisture correct. And what we're seeing is that if you can get your soil moisture dialed in, like 98% of your problems just disappear.
So what do you guys do when you harvest? What are you doing as far as the plants? Do you trim fan leaves off? What's your process? Because I know a lot of people get into this dumbass argument about wet trimming and dry trimming, and why don't you enlighten people as far as what Sunibus, how they handle their situation?
Making me give away all my secrets.
Secrets?
It's not a secret. Yeah. I don't believe in industry secrets anyway. So we basically cut our plants down. If it's ideally I like to harvest in batches. So as you're feeling down your plant, you can feel the buds. They'll be hard and dense, and then it will go from hard and dense to soft and squishy. like between 2 buds. And so you take your tops, let your bottoms finish out. You don't have to do that. You know, you can just take the whole plant. There's whatever floats your boat, whatever you've got time and energy for. And then you hang it. That's it. The wet trimming, I own a wet trimmer. I've done wet trimming, and I will tell you right now, it beats your plants up. It adds chlorophyll, so you don't get a good cure and dry. It's not an ideal situation at all. People take off the fan leaves and they swear by that. I mean, if you live in a super humid area, that might be a good idea. You might want a little bit to take those fan leaves off to truncate your drying time a little bit. If you live in Colorado where it is crazy dry, leave those on. You want to slow your drying time down. You want big stems, you want water leaves, you want things, you know, when you've got 20% humidity, you need that humidity to be up. So you can add humidifiers, but just leaving your plant intact is better. For us, what we found is that California, leave it all intact. Your water leaves are going to actually protect the bud. It'll keep the trichomes intact more. It reduces terpene loss because you have less surface area for the terpenes to actually escape from. And it produces a superior product. We don't mess around with taking anything off, really.
So putting buds in a dehydrator is a no-go, right?
Whatever floats your boat. Freeze drying is the new. And I got to check out some freeze dried weed, and it was interesting. And I don't hate it. I certainly don't love it. I mean, if you're in a time crunch and you don't have a choice, you know, I'm not going to.
I guess that's better than putting it in the oven.
Microwave. Yeah. But
yeah.
you know, people are going to do what they're going to do, and it's fine. Again, for me, you know, don't go buy a freeze dryer so that you can freeze dry your weed. I think that's kind of a waste of resources and money. Hanging it it's the easiest, best way to do it. I don't know. That being said, if that's the way you like to do it, then more power to you.
All right. Before we wrap this up, do you have anything that you want to plug or let anyone know about?
Oh gosh.
Anything you got coming up, or you know, like your website or anything like that?
Yeah, well, you can find me on Instagram at Cannabis. You can find me on Clubhouse, which has been kind of fun. We have a Ask Me Anything About KNF group that my friend Joe McGinn got rolling. So I'm an admin on that. And that is Wednesdays, 1 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, PST. So that's on Clubhouse. If you have an Apple phone and you're on Clubhouse, it's a fun discussion. We have the Ganjier course, which we have just, the first round is already closed. There's, I think we only had 158 students available, or courses, whatever. So that's been closed already, but there will be additional rounds of that certification. And that's been really fun, actually. So the Ganjier is basically it's like a sommelier certification for cannabis. So sommeliers are wine experts. They're generally working in high-end fine dining, and they're recommending what wine to go with your meal. So we created this course for cannabis. There's 18 of us on the council, 5 of us are women, which I'm super, super proud to have that ratio. This is a very, very male-dominated industry, so it's really nice to see Green Flower Media stepping up and really trying to bring in a lot of women on this. This is only the first level that we have so far, but we are starting to book out the students. I'll be teaching some of the in-person classes for that. Hopefully, assuming COVID, we can figure this out. So it took 200 hours, 2 years. It's an intense course. It covers everything about weed. So we go into the genetics, the history, the law behind it, cultivation, the endocannabinoid system, terpenes, cannabinoids, like it's crazy. We sat around at the last council meeting and everybody was like, oh, there's no way I could pass this. Like there is a test at the end. And all of us were like, nope, I couldn't pass this. Like I know my sections, but like Omar's section with law, probably not. Kevin Jodry's section with genetics, I probably could get a C in that, maybe. So it's a cool course. It's been really, really fun to do, and it's going to be really fun to teach people. And I'm really, really excited to have bud tenders in dispensaries that actually know what they're talking about and can actually like help guide people to using this medicine appropriately and figuring out what's right for them. And it's super exciting. So that's rad. This year, coming up this summer, I am going to be doing some workshops on my farm. So kind of follow, I'll probably be posting about that on Instagram and probably on the website when I figure out exactly when and what and how we're doing it. And then Chris Trump, myself, and my friend Michael Drexler, who's up in Washington, are going to be putting on a commercial cannabis natural farming conference / workshop. And it's going to probably be, I think, 4 days. It's going to be very intensive. It is specifically for commercial cannabis. You can come if you're a home grower, but it is not going to be a cheap class. So that is getting put together as we speak. And somewhere in California, we're not really sure where just yet. We've kind of been bouncing around different ideas about different locations. So hopefully we'll be getting all of that nailed down. We're kind of waiting for to figure out what's going on with COVID as well. So it's hard to get together with groups right now, especially in California. But California is also the easy state because I know all the laws here. So I know that we're not going to be, we talked about Nevada at first, and then it was like, oh, except for Nevada's got like crazy laws with cannabis, and we want to be able to utilize weed, at the after the event and networking and things. So we're going to stick with California for this first round. And so that'll be coming up. We're not sure when yet. We've been bouncing June, July, August around, so somewhere in there. And then I know that Chris is also doing his 5-day intensive, I believe, in Boise this year again, and that'll be sometime this summer. So you can go to christrump.com on that if you want to get hands-on training with natural farming from him. And I highly, highly, highly recommend it. And he's also doing an online course too. So like I'm plugging somebody else. But he's going to have
all his stuff's going to be on the site
online,
anyway.
Yeah. So he's going to have an online course coming up. I think he's finishing doing some filming for that. So that'll also be something that'll be accessible for people. Again, that being said, really hands-on, being there in person makes a difference because you're actually acclimating your olfactory senses to smelling things. This is what IMO should smell like. This is what lab should smell like. This is what FAA tastes like. This is what all of these inputs, the second you do this, your learning curve goes from super difficult to oh, I totally get it. And we've seen people come into that class that are like, I've been doing KNF for 6 years. And you'll watch as day number 3, something gets told and they're like, oh my gosh, I totally get it now. And I'm like, yeah, now you get it. Because I was doing it for years too, and I was not doing it exactly right. And it was fun, and I saw improvements in things. But once you start getting all the little nuances just nailed into place, all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is so cool, and it just got so much easier. So highly recommend in-class trainings if you can make it to them from a credible teacher that you gel with. So there are other teachers. Personally, I follow Chris Trump. I like the way he teaches. I like that it's very systematic. I like that you get to leave and really kind of understand what's going on. He also has a private Facebook page for the students that have been in class. So we can all powwow together and people can talk, and you got taught by the same person. So there's, miscommunication. Oh, shoot. I'm getting, there we go. Sorry. I'm getting calls from one of my distributors. We're going to have a branded packaged product at Lowell's in LA. So if you're in Los Angeles, you can go to look up Lowell's, and they're doing a really awesome project called the Origin Collection, where they have a legacy cultivator from Mendocino, one from Trinity, and then they picked our farm from Humboldt County to represent our regions. So that's a new project that is just coming up and is really exciting too. So I'm doing all kinds of stuff. I got all kinds of things going on this year.
Yeah, you're like a fireman now, and
yeah. I got jumped into being president of the fire protection district for my area. I joined the board, and within one meeting they were like, "And you're now president." I'm like, "Yay, go me!" So I have all the fire protection district papers at my house, and I figure that, you know, this is great because if there's a fire nearby, they're going to come save me first.
Yeah, and I think we would be remiss to mention the fact that the way we know each other is through the Organic Cultivators Facebook group, and if anyone's not a part of that, they should go check that out. And hopefully, you know, we'll have a website up here in the next few months connected to that, and you know, hopefully it'll all be a lot of fun and just keep growing everything. And
yeah, the OC group is great. There's a lot. I don't yell at people.
I know, I'm joking.
I talk sternly. Sometimes I yell at people, but it's only when people call me names. So if you challenge my credibility or something like that, yeah, I might not be the friendliest person. And sometimes I'm curt about things, and sometimes that's just because I've answered the question 25,000 times and I really don't want to answer it again, but I'm going to because the information needs to get out there. So, you know, I don't think I know that I do offend people at times. I know that I attack things that people don't want to have attacked, like bananas and avocados. That being said, it's all well, and that being said, like, it's literally from a place of love. It really is. I know sometimes it doesn't feel like it, you guys, but the truth of the matter is that I literally send every email, all of my correspondence. It ends with sending love and blessings, because I send love and blessings to everybody, but that includes, you know, love and blessings. What that means is literally like looking beyond yourself and looking at the world around you and seeing how your choices do impact other people. And cannabis, for some reason, it tends to be, it makes me a little bit sad, because it's really one of the industries that has so much potential for heart and love and healing. And yet there's this other really ugly, dirty side that is just all about greed and money and, like, you know, defending the avocado tech. I'm like, you know, I don't really care how well it works. It's not a good choice. So, you know, it's not coming from a place of like, you suck and I don't like you and what you're doing is wrong. What it's coming from is a place of like, we can make better choices as a community, as an industry. We have the opportunity to push the change we want to see in the world. It's impossible to get industrial agriculture to move and pivot the way that cannabis can. So if we can become, you know, the star child of changing climate and literally saving our planet, why would we not choose that? Why would we not listen to these things and say, yes, I can use that bottled nutrient, but that's not a good choice. I can make better choices. That doesn't have to be driven by ego and by, you know, this staunch belief that your way is the right way. Like, there's all kinds of organic methodology. I happen to love natural farming because I love KNF and I love to have my inputs. But if you don't want to do that, there's a million other ways you can do things. You can do Google culture. You can, you know, go to a farm near you and use their, you know, go in and like clean the scraps of lettuce off the ground or something if it's an organic lettuce farm, and utilize that to make compost. You can have worms, you can have black soldier flies, you can raise animals, you can not raise animals, you can, I mean, there's just so many amazing methods. Combination of all of it, whatever you want to do.
Yep.
As long as there is at least some mindfulness about how that choice impacts the rest of us that share this world. And that's where I kind of like, I will get very assertive on these things, because I do firmly believe that if we are going to continue to live on this planet, I mean, we have two choices. We either fix the fucking planet or we figure out how to get off of it. There's no other options here, people. This is not sustainable. The event arrives and has been crested. We have the potential to turn it around, but only when we make choices that maybe aren't the most convenient for us. So, that's my that's my environmental soapbox of like, smoke weed, save the planet.
Nah, I think that's a great spot to end it, for real. That's perfect. So, everybody say bye to Wendy.
Thanks for your time today, James. I appreciate it. This was really fun. And yeah, I am literally sending everybody love and blessings always.
Nah, I appreciate you. Hang out there for a second.